Okay, and we have Val Vandersloot here and Jay Hurst, the producer here, KTWU. And then we also have Becky here real quick. Let's go with Becky real fast. Say hi, Becky.
Hi.
And Becky wanted to join us here at the zoo, and we have the Mr. Wonderful Joe Maloney. He's a zookeeper here at the Topeka Zoo, and we thank you, Joe, for spending time with us this morning.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And we had such a good time watching the birds eating. You were able to give them their breakfast, and they're happily fed right now. Can you tell us a little bit, just an overview of what kind of birds we have here in the rainforest at the Topeka Zoo?
Yeah, so we have a wide variety of songbirds, which are your small birds that kind of flit around in the trees that you just sometimes maybe just catch glimpses of. And we have some wading birds and shorebirds, which are birds that tend to stay in water that's maybe up to not too deep, but midway up their legs, and they like to eat fish and small insects and crustaceans. Two of the birds that get mistaken for flamingos here a lot are actually in that group. They're a scarlet ibis and a spoonbill, they're both bright pink, and they're taller with longish legs, and they have long beaks. Spoonbills have the longer flat beaks, and the ibis have the really long thin pointed beaks. And those birds eat primarily different forms of meat and fish that we give them, whereas the songbirds that I mentioned, which are those smaller birds, more colorful, that are flying around, they eat a wide variety of fruits, seeds, grains, and a lot of insects. Everything from mealworms to crickets to roaches, a wide variety of insects.
Wow. I know you talked a little bit about those spoonbills, and I loved how when they were eating and they swiped their beaks across the ground. Tell us a little bit about that. How does that help them get their food?
So that is a behavior that works well for them when they're getting food out of water, because as I mentioned, they tend to spend most of their time in water that comes partially up their legs, and they'll swish around to try to grab stuff in the water and filter that water out, and then just get maybe the little snail or the little crustacean, like a crawdad or something, and then they can swallow it.
And it's pretty
or
amazing.
Fish, a little fish. They'll happily take a fish.
Yeah. Well, and I was always amazed too. I think is the ibis. Their beaks are so long, and they get a tiny little speck of food that I can't even see with my human eye on the ground, and somehow it goes from the tip all the way into their. It's pretty amazing how all of the birds have their unique way of eating.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive with that long, thin. It's almost like if you were trying to use, tweezers that were 2 feet long and just grab something delicate. But when they're young, they're not so good at it. That's why when you see young birds, they're kind of clumsy. It does take a while to practice to get good at that. But yeah, when they are, it's like fingers almost. They can just pick something up, like a tiny mealworm or a tiny cricket, and eat it. And from our perspective, that's really impressive.
Yeah. So what are the lifespans? I'm sure it ranges from bird to bird here. I guess really lifespan, and then what's the longest tenant here, if you know that?
Currently, our oldest resident of the rainforest is actually Big Red, our red-footed tortoise. He's right over there. He is currently about 38 years old, which is probably a little past halfway for his species lifespan. But as far as birds, it varies a lot, but a lot of the smaller songbirds have lifespans that are probably in the 5 to 15 year range.
Okay.
Some of your bigger wading birds, like the ibis or the spoonbill, they can make it into their 20s. A good exception to that, though, is our Bali Mina, which are the beautiful white birds that are about this big you may have seen flying around. They can live into their 20s, which is pretty old for a very small bird species like that. Our sloths are another animal that can live a surprisingly long period of time. Jackie, our longest resident here in terms of, or for our sloths, she's been here, I believe, since the early 2000s. She is 31 years old now, which is starting to get up there for a sloth, but for a lot of mammals that size, that's a pretty long lifespan.
Now, for a lot of your birds in here, and especially the ibis and the spoonbill, are those generational birds? Like the birds you see now, have they been bred off of ones we may have seen 10 or 15 years ago? How do you keep the population up?
So the current group of spoonbill and ibis we have did come here from other zoos, but they were born at other zoos. We do have some birds at various times like that were born here. but that doesn't happen quite as often as a lot of our mammals. The birds may tend to come and go more frequently for the purpose of creating a healthy, sustainable population.
So just like every other thing you guys work with here, the tigers and everyone else, I mean, you're looking at those opportunities to kind of make the genetic pool stronger for the birds.
In a lot of, that happens quite a bit. Kind of an exception to that is our tamarin group, our small monkeys, the small orange monkeys at the front of the rainforest. Their social structure is such that they live in really small family groups, maybe 4 to 7 individuals, and it's your breeding pair, which are typically the parents, and then of every member of that group for the most part, and then a couple of offspring. And so at any given time, we'll have the alpha male and female, the parents, and then maybe 2 or 3 of their offspring, which right now we have mom and dad, which their names are Chris and Espirita, and then their 2 twins, Mora and Zico. So
They are adorable.
Tell us a little bit about what's behind us here for the feeding and enrichment. What is this, and how do you utilize it?
So when you come into the rainforest, on the west side of the dome, you'll see a big wood and mesh structure, which is what's behind me. That is referred to as a Howdy structure or a Howdy area. I don't know where the term comes from. I've tried to look it up, and I've never figured it out. But it's zoos and aviaries will often refer to structures that birds can go in, and we can get them in there to work with them as a Howdy structure. For the most part, when you see it, the door will be wide open, and you'll see a bird fly in and out, like this blue-gray tanager that just flew in. Very small bird, but he's in there looking for food. And we feed our birds in here every day, so they're used to going in here, they're comfortable with going in here. And the purpose for that is if we need to have any sort of veterinary procedure or just maybe get a closer look because maybe a bird is holding a wing funny or it looks like maybe there could be an issue with a foot, especially these small birds, you really have to get close to them to see that. We can simply wait for them to go in to eat and close the door, and then we have the opportunity to go in and see them more closely. Because if you've been here and walked around and seen the birds, you could probably imagine if I was to try to run around with a net and try to catch these birds, it would not go so well. I'd be here, it just wouldn't work.
It'd be a whole day to catch one.
Yeah, and they're smart. They would just fly up in a tree and stare at me, and then they just wouldn't come down. So this works well for everybody because they're used to going in there, they're comfortable with that space, because they go in there multiple times a day. It's less stressful on them, less stressful on me, and it makes things go a lot easier.
How long has the Rainforest been in operation here?
I believe 1974.
Were there very many before this one across the U.S., or how early on was this Rainforest compared to other zoos?
This was definitely one of the first ones, and I believe it was the first waterfall, or at least the tallest waterfall like this when it was built.
Nice.
So it did have some interesting firsts when it was built.
That's great with the birds, and we started talking about the tamarins. I know they got an updated little area for their family, so you want to take a look at that?
Absolutely.
All right. All right, we're now at the Golden Lion Tamarins. And Joe, tell us a little about them, their family structures, and this great new enclosure.
Yeah, so last time we were here, we looked inside the empty space because we hadn't moved the tamarins into it. We were still kind of finishing up. We were making a new tree for them and a few other things to kind of modernize it. We added a waterfall to help boost the humidity. They still have access to their outside area, and they just go back and forth as they choose. But they have been spending a lot of time in this indoor area. A lot more square footage, a lot more space, more space for them to not only utilize but better visibility to see them as well. But yes, so this is, as you mentioned, these are our Golden Lion Tamarins. We have a group of 4, which is a pretty typical troop size. We have Chris, who is the dad. Espirita is the mom. Chris is actually reaching in that bowl getting some grapes and he's grabbing the crickets out first. And then there's some maple syrup in there for him. Espirita, who is the mom, who is actually behind him, kind of to his right, or to his left rather. And then the twins, brother and sister, Zico and Mora, are bouncing around all over the place, in and out. And they are getting a wide variety of food right now. So in the wild, their diet is basically a wide variety of fruit, which is typical to what you think of for small monkeys. That's pretty commonly what you might think about. But what surprises a lot of people is not only will they eat a lot of insects, but if they run into a small rodent or a lizard or an amphibian, they'll happily eat that too. So they'll grab a mouse and eat it, a small lizard, a bird egg, a wide variety of insects. They really like tree sap, which is why I mentioned they have some maple syrup, which is something I can do to kind of simulate that. And they're also a lot like us. If it has a lot of sugar, they like it. But yeah, their diet is extremely varied, but I'd say their favorite things are insects of a wide variety of kinds and bananas.
What kind of conservation in the wild is happening with these? I know there's not a lot of land area left for them. I think they're from a couple spots in Brazil.
They live along the coast of Brazil, and if you were to look at a range map of where they live, which we actually have one coming as part of the finishing touches of this space, some nice graphics to show that. It's almost like because Brazil is a huge country, it's basically like a little pinprick. They have the tiniest of space left to live. And the trouble that they run into is that where they live, the forest is actually getting fragmented. So they're having trouble finding other tamarins.
The colonies are spread apart. There's too much open land between.
Yeah, and that basically reduces a lot of breeding.
Because they don't go to the ground very often, do they? Are they mostly
not a lot. Yeah, they're way more vulnerable on the ground. A lot of animals, a lot of predators to eat them on the ground. There's still a lot of animals that can get them in trees, but they're so fast and agile, their best chance of escaping is in a tree. They are fast, they can bounce along and run quickly on the ground, but they're far more equipped to run fast and climb in the trees. That's where they're most agile. As you can see them bouncing around, they're like gymnasts and acrobats, they really are.
And curious.
Very, very curious. These are the twins, Zico and Mora.
Aww.
Mora, the sister, and her brother Zico. And that's their mom, Espirita, in the back.
So how long did it take for them to wean from their mom?
The mom and dad actually cooperatively rear them, and typically they usually have twins. Mm-hmm. That's the highest percentage of the time they'll have twins. Dad will carry one, mom will carry the other, and then they swap for nursing. And they will ride on their parents more or less full time for about 3 to 4 months, and then they'll start taking short trips off. Some of the more bold tamarins will start taking little trips off earlier. Some of the ones that don't want to leave mom and dad go a little longer. But then usually about 6 months or so, you can pretty safely have they're on their own.
Mm-hmm.
They're just tiny little tamarins still. They reach maturity, pretty much full grown, at about 18 months. Typical lifespan, in the wild is definitely going to be a lot shorter due to, it's tough. It's hard work to make it in the wild. There's predators, disease, you have to find all your own food. So it's almost certainly going to be less than what we see in zoos, which are typically in the 15 to 20 year range, is how long they'll live. And I mentioned they normally have twins. Rarely they will have a single birth. That's pretty rare. And actually, Espirita, the mom of this group, was a very rare solo birth, interestingly enough. But they will also occasionally have triplets or even quadruplets. Unfortunately, in virtually all cases that we've seen, whether it's in the wild or in zoos, when they have more than two, it's almost certain that beyond two, none of them will survive. They're usually stillborn or they're undersized and they're just not strong enough to make it. And they're not quite, they do a good job with two usually, but three is hard to balance nursing and making sure all of them get enough milk.
In the wild, having twins most of the time is advantageous because if one does get killed, but how often in the wild do you see both twins make it to adulthood, or is it?
There are some field studies that have looked at this, and most of the stuff that I've read said that probably 50 to 60% will not survive to that 1 year mark. So pretty safe estimate, they'll have twins, 50% chance that one of them will, at least 50% that one of them won't make it to that 1 year mark. So it's, like I said, it's tough out there. It really is. They have a lot of predators and they have, to fend for themselves, to find their own food. It's definitely a hard life, but they are well adapted to that tree life, that arboreal life as it's called, and they do really well.
What time of day is best to see them here at the zoo? When are they most active?
The most active would probably be the first hour after we open, between 9 and 10 a.m. They have a lot of food and enrichment at that time, and they wake up when the sun comes up. So in the summertime, they're up at 6 a.m. But as we move into winter, like for instance today, I didn't even come in here and turn on the lights and check on things till about 7:20, and they were still asleep. As we get into winter, they'll push that. They'll probably be asleep till about 8 a.m. So, you getting here and looking at them between 9 and 10, they're still kind of doing their morning grooming routine, getting ready, eating breakfast. Once we get to about midday, they're kind of relaxing, not doing quite so much. Then they'll have another little burst of activity in the early afternoon, probably about 2 to 4. And then once we get into winter, that's when it's getting close to bedtime again, because they go to sleep when the sun goes down. And they'll, in the winter, they'll sleep 12 to 16 hours a day, whereas in the summer, it's more like just 8 hours, so 8 to 12 hours. And it's funny, if it's stormy outside, even if it is the summer, they'll sleep later if it's cloudy.
Huh, that's cute. I wish I could do that.
I know, it'd be very nice. Yeah, I purposely, I don't even, in the winter in particular, I don't usually even come in here until 7:30, 7:45, just because I don't want to make them grumpy when I wake them up too early.
All right, Joe. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with us about the Golden Lion Tamarins?
In the near future, we have some really nice graphics that have been designed that are going to be coming to kind of cover a lot of this area.
That's cool.
And so in the near future, we'll have that. So it'll be great to come and not only see them in this new space, but you'll get to see some fun information about them as a species and what's going on in their native habitat and all that.
Great.
Good information.
That is great information. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. It's been great again. And everyone, make sure you get out here to Topeka Zoo. This rainforest is a real treasure here. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.